Greetings, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad you're here. Thank you for tuning in. Today, we're going to be reading The Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams. This is chapter 6. In chapters 1 through 5, we've learned that we cannot sidestep or ignore the integrated people and their interests. The tragic mulatto has continually tried to destroy our civilization over and over and over again, and we have over 3,800 years of examples of them doing that very thing. We can't negate the fact that we have to continue to try to rebuild our civilization, and we can't negate the idea that until we decide to do something different, nothing will be different. This show is part of a podcasting network called KWAZ Radio. There are other hosts I invite you to enjoy.
Greetings. My name is the Revolutionary Matron, and my show is called The Learning Curve. I broadcast on a network called KWAZ Radio. There are other hosts on the network I'd like you to meet.
Greetings, everyone. This is Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast, inviting you to tune in to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed here belong solely to the respondent, and they do not necessarily reflect any broadcast networks, affiliates, nor sponsors. The Learning Curve is a broadcast created for the benefit of my global community. Black is a consciousness. Content is being used for our commentary, research, criticism, education, scholarship, teaching, preaching, and news reporting. No copyright infringement is intended. I will make enunciation mistakes. I will give you my opinion about the information. And if you ever ask, I will send you my source.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. Chancellor Williams wrote this book almost 40 years ago at this point and is still relevant to us today. I want to say greetings to the Pro-Black Perspective, which is our very own Oni Tase. Greetings to Sister Raw, the Forecast, Brother Bakari, Koku, and all the other people that are listening. He starts the chapter with this quote: "When, if ever, the Black people actually organize as a race in their various population centers, they will find that the basic guiding ideology they now seek and so much need is embedded in their own traditional philosophy and constitutional system, simply waiting to be extracted and set forth. And while the work in this field has yet to be advanced further, some of the most fundamental principles of African political science and philosophy of life are to be found in the pages which follow." And that's how he opens chapter 6. And I believe that that's true. I think that he did give us a really good foundation by looking back at who we were and what we had, and that we can use this information to build something great in the future. Chapter 6, The African Constitution, Birth of Democracy. In our introductory preview of African history, references were made to the common origin of the people of white world, the people the white world prefers to call Negro. That we are here studying a single race, not races, and not a single people, not peoples, is a major theory and fact of Black history and one of our principal guidelines. We are therefore primarily concerned with those things which are characteristically African, practically universally among them from one end of the continent to the other, and which thereby indicated an ancient common culture in a common center of Black civilization. On this we stand. In this light, the African Constitution is discussed as a body of fundamental theories, principles, and practices drawn from the customary laws that govern Black African societies from the earliest times. The first task was to divorce traditional African institutions from those influenced by later Asian and European incursions, to determine what is truly African in origin and what is in fact either Asian or European or a reflection of any other external influence. Another task was to determine whether an institution called African was in fact African in the sense of being universal among the Blacks, a continent-wide institution in contradistinction to something peculiar to one or more tribes, nations, or African regions. This distinction is important here, for too often things are characterized as African which apply only to certain societies. These represent the development of the whole complex cultural variations about which Western writers declaim in emphasizing the great ethnic differences among the people. This is not accidental or without design. Caucasian fears about the possibility of Blacks developing a sense of oneness and unity of action is deep and centuries old. Many subtle schemes are used to maintain divisiveness and with success. He said all that to say he tried to strip away everything that wasn't purely African. He tried to get to the root of these institutions that he found and strip away the Asian, European, or Arabic or Egyptian. He tried to strip away all of the different influences that could have possibly impacted these institutions and look at them purely from an African perspective. A student of comparative history can see without difficulty that various people scattered all over the world developed similar institutions without ever having had any contacts whatsoever. This is equally true of the most isolated groups. Similar circumstances may produce similar ideas and cultural patterns, all of which may confirm the Cartesian theory about the equal distribution of common sense among all mankind. This, by simply doing what comes naturally, one society may evolve a life system not unlike another society 10,000 miles away across distant oceans. Therefore, neither the external influence theory nor that of the common origin of a widely segmented people should be hastily affirmed. We hold this to be true even in the study of one race in the generally same environment of one continent. The evidence must still be conclusive. Origin of African democracy. The foregoing observations suggest that the constitution of any people or nation, written or unwritten, derives from its customary rules of life, and that we now call democracy, that what we now call democracy was generally the earliest system among various peoples throughout the ancient world. What was a relatively new development was absolute monarchy. Among the blacks, democratic institutions evolved and functioned in socio-economic and political systems, which Western writers call stateless societies or societies without chiefs. When these societies were referred to as primitive democracies, the writers are in fact doing the very opposite of what they intended. Far from being just a descriptive term for backward people, primitive also means the first, the beginners. Moreover, many of these stateless societies were states, in fact, without necessarily conforming to a predetermined Western structural pattern of state. Indeed, what is called a stateless society in Africa would hardly be classified as such in the West, for the Western definition of a state does not include the requirements of one man as its executive head, a state being a collection of people occupying a given territory and living under their own government independently of external control. Greetings, Brother Bakari. I'm so glad you're here. These states are set forth at the outset because both the constitutional system and its offspring, African democracy, originated in chiefless societies. And what is even more significant, democracy reached its higher development here where the people actually governed themselves without chiefs, where self-government was a way of life and law and order were taken for granted. The basic structural outline of these states remained the same throughout Africa. There were the individual variations and exceptions. The amazing thing was and is the uniformity. Amazing how the most basic elements of ancient Black civilizations could have been held on to continent-wide by all of these dispersed and isolated groups in spite of the continuing impact of unimaginable forces of destruction. The lineage ties and responsibilities and the age grade or age set system were the earliest institutions through which African constitution functioned and out of which its democracy was born. It was a network of kinsmen, and alleged kinsmen, all of whom descended from the same ancestor or related ancestors. All might live in the same community or state, but they were often scattered far and near in separate and independent societies. Greetings, Forecast. How you doing tonight? The ancestor from whom they claimed descent was always great because of some outstanding deed or extraordinary achievements. These generally grew in magnitude as times and generations passed, thus causing the true achievements to be overlaid by the false claims growing out of praise songs. Each generation of poets and storytellers gave the imagination full range in romantic glory. Myths were born in this manner, and the later concepts of both royalty and divinity gained support from the same source. In continuous independent chiefdoms, the lineage was the powerful factor in providing the basis and incentive for the later formation of kingdoms and empires. No people in African history used the concept of kinship ties more effectively than the Lunda people in remarkable expansion of their empire. Even more remarkable than the territorial expansion of the Lunda Empire was their idea of a nation as one big brotherhood. Accordingly, instead of first attempting to conquer and annex by force, they would approach independent states and seek to demonstrate from oral history that all of them were merely segments of a common lineage, all brothers in fact, And we can use that to this very day to when we approach new people and show them how we are all interconnected, whether it's through business or community. We can show people how they're connected to us, and people respond to that. It appears that the majority of states believed in the principle of common ancestry and readily became members of the empire. Some required more facts before they were convinced. Still others were not convinced or preferred to remain separate and independent. These were generally conquered and given a lower status in the nation than those who united voluntarily. But we are considering lineage before the rise of kingdoms, and in particular, the lineage as the governing and organizing force in states without kings or chiefs, where community consensus was the supreme law that anyone could ignore only at his peril. There were interesting aspects to the many situations where a large number of these chiefless states were scattered over a wide territory, each independent of the others, yet fully aware, and unlike in Lundaland, all had to be convinced that they belonged to a common lineage. Kinship found expression in trade and in temporary confederations when attacked by external foes, those not considered to be members of their lineage. There were quarrels and warfare between these member states of common lineage. The highly humane aspect of African warfare that puzzled many Western visitors doubtlessly developed from the widespread recognition of lineage or kinship ties. For in the much heralded tribal wars, the main objective was to overcome or frighten away the adversary, not to kill at all if it could be avoided. Hence the hideous masks and blood-curdling screams as they charged. So they weren't trying to kill each other when they had these different tribal wars. They were just trying to shout down or scare down the other side. But they initially wanted them to come into the fold willingly. Even when the enemy was defeated or completely surrounded, escape routes were provided, the victors pretending to not be aware of them. Indeed, there are reports of rest periods called when neither side seemed to be winning. At such times, the warriors on both sides might meet at the nearest stream and refresh themselves, kid with each other, and laugh at each other's jokes until the drums, gongs, or trumpets sounded for the resumption of battle. This was traditional Africa. How did it change to a warfare of killing, lineage or no lineage? How did it happen that even now, in our modern and advanced civilization, some of the most murderous and inhumane wars are fought by Blacks against Blacks? And this in the face of their increasing awareness that they are, in fact, one people. It is quite clear that in early Africa, quote unquote, war was not much more than a frightful game when among themselves. Was the radical change brought about by the death-dealing incursions from Asia and Europe? This raises other questions of great urgency. Are we really civilized today? Have we not substituted the trappings of civilization, our triumphs in science, technology, and the computer revolution for civilization ties? Suffice to say that the steady weakening of lineage ties and its spirit of unity was also a weakening of the sense of brotherhood and unity among the Blacks. Today, it finds little expression except in various languages or tribal groups, and these maintain it more and more as a cohesive force to be used against all others. The age grade or age set, also called class, was the specific organizational structure through which the society functioned. Classification was determined by the period in which one was born. All persons born in the same year or within a general but well-defined period before or even after a given year belong to the same age grade. Each grade covered a block of years. Age grade, one might include all children up to age 12, grade 2, from 13 to 18, grade 3, 19 to 28, grade 4, 29 to 40, and grade 5, 40 and above. There was seniority within each grade according to age and intelligence. Intelligence and wisdom were supposed to match one's age. Stated another way, the African philosophy that accorded so much deference to elders was based upon the assumption that all other things being equal, those who were living in the world and experiencing life before others were born should know more than these others. This qualification is simple because it was later applied in the election of chiefs and kings. Being heir to the throne was not enough. One had to meet other qualifications or be passed over. Therefore, being older or the oldest in one's group did not command the usual respect if one was lazy, a troublemaker, or a fool. Greetings, Sister Ra. How you doing today? Early education. The interlocking responsibilities of the various grades accounted for the smooth functioning of the chiefless states. Each grade had its own social, economic, and political role. The children's set covered the years of game and play. Around the ages of 6 and 7, however, general training and some little jobs began to be mingled with play. Primary education included storytelling, mental arithmetic, community songs and dances, learning the names of various birds and animals, the identification of poisonous snakes, local plants and trees, and how to run and climb swiftly when pursued by dangerous animals. Child training also included knowing and associating with members of one's age group as brothers and sisters, and to regard them as brothers and sisters until death and beyond. Little chores around the house became routine, such as gathering sticks of wood for fuel, bringing water, tending the cattle, feeding the chickens, or, if a girl, looking after a baby or younger ones, imitating mother at cooking and trying to learn how to sew and knit. The nearest thing to the boy's political role in childhood was when he carried his father or his uncle's stool to visit to village council meetings and listen to the interminable debates. The next grade above childhood was teenage through the age 18. These periods, of course, varied in different societies. Now, both training and responsibilities were stepped up. Playtime was either over or very much limited. Education and training became more complex and extensive. The youth's entire future depended upon their performance at this age level. He or she was marked for success or failure in the second grade set that began at age 13. The boy is now required to learn his extended family history and that of his society, the geography of the region, names of neighboring states and the nature of relations with them, the handling of weapons, hunting as a skilled art, rapid calculation, clearing the bush for planting, the nature of soils and which kinds grew the best, military tactics, care and breeding of cattle, the division of labor between males and females, bartering tactics, rules of good manners at home and abroad, competitive sports. He was required to provide leadership examples for the childhood age group below and responsibilities to the age group above. As Onitase says, this is the chapter on gender roles, and it talks about the democracy from an African perspective. But gender roles is a part of democracy from an African perspective because these different roles that you had at different ages based on your gender all played into the adult that you were growing into. They all intermingled. All of these roles and responsibilities were intertwined with one another. The apprenticeship system in which one became a skilled craftsman was the most important of the second level age set activities. This is another reason why this age grade was most crucial of all. At its end, one went through the initiation rites for the exalted level of manhood. The girl age group differed from those of the boys. Introduction to womanhood roles, for example, was earlier. They had the same intellectual training as the boys: history, geography, rapid calculation, poetry, music, and dance. The training in childcare, housekeeping, gardening, cooking, marketing, social relations with the particular stress on good manners. These were some of the essentials in the age grade education and training of young people at this level. Housekeeping mentioned above does not reveal the important kind of training that came under the heading, for its most important aim was how to be a successful wife, an everlasting, desirable wife. In many societies, this training by older women away from the community included the art of exciting sexual intercourse, position variations, cleanliness in the relationship, and in short, the do's and don'ts in intimate relations. These early Black societies were in many ways far in advance of the modern. The first two grades may be designated as A and B, the third as C, the fourth as D, and the final and highest grade as E. Grade C, ages 19 through 28, was the manhood and first line of action group. Its members led in hunting, community construction, preparing the fields for planting, forming the various industrial craft guilds or secret societies, each of which guarded the processes of its art, protecting the far-ranging grazing cattle and upkeep of roads and paths between villages, policing areas when necessary, and forming the bulwark of the fighting force. The young women in grade C were generally wives. They were responsible for the planting and care of the farms, the heavy work of bush clearing, etc., having been done by the men, the operations of the markets, hence the stress on mental arithmetic in their training, visiting and care of the sick and aged, formation of women's societies, the media for women's social, economic, and indirect but very real political influence, and they were responsible for and in supreme control of all matters concerning the home. In these societies that had female fighting forces, the women's army were formed almost entirely from age grade C. So that's 19 to 28. In terms of constitutional rights and duties, the two were inseparable in early Africa. There was not much difference between age group C and age group D. Seniority was the significant difference, since D was from 29 to 40. If otherwise qualified, Members of this class, upon reaching the age 36, were eligible for election to the most highly honored body in the society, the Council of Elders, an honor and privilege specially reserved for those 40 years old and above, Group E. So as you can see, they had a system in place and they had roles and responsibilities, and those roles and responsibilities played into the different roles that you had in that society, and they leveled up as you leveled up. The earliest judicial system. In the chiefless states, the function of the elders was wholly advisory. For this reason, they rarely ever met as a council. A council meeting might be called by the senior elder in case of an extreme emergency. Matters involving members of the same family or clan could be settled by the family council, each family or clan having its own elder. Conflicts between families or clans could be brought before any mutually acceptable elder for settlement. The elder's judgment was not binding on the parties to the dispute. This was the constitutional theory. If the case was, quote unquote, big and serious, and the disputants were dissatisfied with the elder's decision regarding it, they could call in one or more additional elders to hear and pass on the case. Their decision was also advisory and could be disregarded by the parties to the action. Yes, the elders' advisory judgments could be ignored under ancient African constitutional law. They weren't always ignored, but they could be ignored. Yet, under practical operation of that same constitution, the disputants could ignore their elders' judgment only at their peril, for to ignore the elders was considered to be ignoring the community itself. The only exception to this were those cases where the elder or elders rendered an obviously bad decision. Even then, it was not left to the contestants to say whether the judgment was good or bad. The community decided, because the community was thought to be represented in the ever-present crowd at such hearings. They, the people present, always indicated their attitude by expressions and nods of approval or disapproval of decisions reached. So your court cases court cases were not a private closed door matter. It was a public thing, often held in the public square, and members of the community right then and there could give their agreement or disagreement with it. The constitutional theory and principle here are especially significant because of the important form they took in all African societies in every part of the continent as they evolved from societies without chiefs to centralized states under chiefs, kings, and emperors. In this continent-wide constitutional development, the chief or king became the mouthpiece of the people and the instrument of carrying out their will. They still had no ruler in the Asian or European sense. On questions in dispute, he was in the same position as litigants in the chiefless states. Like them under the Constitution, he had absolute power in theory, and in theory, he could ignore the council and do exactly as he pleased. But in practice, like the disputants, he did not dare defy the Council of Elders, which also had evolved and become the people, their direct representatives. Africans generally prefer to dwell on the constitutional theories and not the constitutional practices. They proudly speak of the freedom and absolute powers of the chief or king. Some will even tell you that the king owned all the land in the country. They are not trying to deceive. Words of another language often fail to translate the people's concepts or meanings. When they say the king is supreme or he has absolute power, they mean that he has absolute power to carry out the will of the people. It was so well understood that supreme power rested in the people and that it was never thought necessary to state such a fact. Likewise, they would say and say proudly, the king owns all the land in the country, since everybody but a fool knew that he didn't, that nobody owned the land, again in the Western sense, and that the king's role was that of a custodian or overseer, his principal duty being to see that the land was fairly distributed among all the families. In the chiefless society, the elders were the overseers of the land distribution families. Finally, nothing contributed more to the efficiency and success of self-government without governors than the system wherein each age grade was responsible for the conduct of its members, and that before any misconduct could reach one's age grade council, it was handled by his family council. So again, they had this very leveled up system of interdependent councils for every level of life. The women had a council, the men had a council, you had an age grade council, you had a family council, then you had a council of elders, then you had a larger council that you could feed off into to get decisions from regarding your issue. So a council was just a governing body or a group of people that were coming together in the community to make decisions about whatever your issue was. Finally, nothing contributed more to the efficiency and success of self-government governors than the system wherein each age grade was responsible for the conduct of its members, and that before any misconduct could reach one's age grade council, it was handled by his family council. This never meant leniency. It meant the very opposite, because each family was jealous of its honor and image in the community, and any member whose behavior reflected unfavorably on the family would be in trouble with his own family first of all. The result of this was that the age grade councils rarely ever had a case, and obviously this self-government, beginning with the basic social unit, the family, radically reduced the number of cases that went up before the elders. Stated another way, each family policed itself. Each age group policed itself, so that there was little or nothing that the community as a whole had to do. Each group elected its own leaders. These met with other age grade leaders on community matters that cut across age grade lines. Shaming was a part of their society. They would shame you if you did something that was inappropriate for your family, towards your age grade. If they caught you doing something inappropriate, you had a price to pay, and that price was heaviest first among your family, because a family name meant something. Your name was honorable. It was therefore in the societies without chiefs or kings where African democracy was born, and where the concept that the people are sovereign as a natural breathing, excuse me, and where the concept that the people are sovereign was as natural as breathing. In this, and this is why in traditional Africa, the rights of the individual never came before the rights of the community. Individual freedom was unlimited until it clashed with the interests or welfare of the community. This is also why the evolution to a higher centralized state still found the king under communal law, not above it, and definitely unable to do as he pleased. These self-governing people did not have the utopian society in any idealistic sense. Theirs was a practical society in every way. The laws were natural laws, and order and justice prevailed because the society could not otherwise survive. Theirs was, in fact, a government of the people. Theirs was, in fact, not a theory, but a government by the people. And it was, in fact, a government for the people. He's emphasizing that because the United States, which is where he's writing from, says, it's of the people, for the people, by the people, and all of these things about the people. But that's only a theory because we live in a republic. We live in a quote unquote democratic republic. We don't have true democracy. This kind of government did not pass from the earth. That this kind of government did not pass from the earth is another fact we now call modern progress. We shall note later the impact of some of the developments previously mentioned on the traditional constitution, particularly as it operated in the reestablished centralized migratory states. Meanwhile, it might be well if we single out some of the key provisions of that Constitution. For again, the aim is to set forth in specific terms the actual all African institutions that all Africans lost and of which their descendants do not have even a memory. One of the world's greatest constitutional systems was one of their tragic losses. Some political theories and principles of ancient African constitutional law and fundamental rights of African people, drawn from African traditional constitution and customary laws. Different versions and modifications of the same laws occurred in different societies. Number one, the people are the first and final source of all power. Number two, the rights of the community of people are and of right ought to be superior to those of any individual, including chiefs and kings. A, the will of the people is the supreme law. B, kings and chiefs are under the law, not above it. Number three, kings, chiefs, and elders are leaders, not rulers. They are the elected representatives of the people and instruments for executing their will. 4, government and people are one and the same. 5, the family is recognized as the primary social, judicial, economic, and political unity or unit in the society. The family council may function as a court empowered to try all internal, non-serious matters involving only members of the extended family group. Number 6, the elder of each extended family or clan is chosen representative and its chosen representative on the council. Number 7, decisions in council are made by the elders. The chief or king must remain silent even when the council's decision is announced. It is through a speaker or linguist. Decrees or laws are issued in the same manner to assure that the voice of the chief or king is the voice of the people. This is an example of a provision that had wide variations. Number 8, the land belongs to no one. It is God's gift to mankind for use and as a sacred heritage transmitted by our forefathers as a bond between the living and the dead, to be held in trust by each generation for the unborn who will follow, and thus to the last generation. Number 9, each family therefore has a right to land free of charge, sufficient in acreage for its economic well-being, White people don't like that. For the right for the right to the opportunity and means to make a living is the right to live. A, the land accordingly cannot be sold or given away. B, the land may be held for life and passed on to the family's heirs and so on forever. C, the chief is the custodian of all land, the principal duty being to assure fair distribution and actual use. So as you can see, there were some very specific guidelines about the land and how the land was to be used, and that you couldn't sell the land, but you could pass it on. So these rules helped them to better govern and use the land that they had available, because it was a gift from God, a bond between the living and the dead. The land was sacred. We're not supposed to be paying taxes on the land that we use. Number 10, all monies, gifts, taxes, and other forms of donations to chief or king still belong to the people for relief or aid to individuals in times of need. Number 11, every member of the state has the right to appeal from a lower to higher court. In some multiple states, appeals could be taken even from the king's court to the mother of the nation. A, the procedure was from the chief's village court to the district court to the provincial court to the king's court. Such appeals were allowed in serious or major crime cases only, those affecting the whole society. Number 12, fines for offenses against an individual went to the victim, not the court. A, part of the money received from the loser was returned to him as an expression of goodwill and desire for renewal of friendship. B, another part was given as a fee to the trial court as an appreciation of justice. So as you can see, what is it called? Restitution. Restitution was paid to victims, but the person paying the restitution got some of that money back, and a small portion of that also went to the trial court adjudicators, to the trial court, in an attempt to show appreciation for justice. Number 13. Royalty in African terms meant royal worth, the highest in character, wisdom, sense of justice, and courage. A, he who founded the nation by uniting many as one must be the real leader, guide, and servant of his people. And B, the people, in honor of the founder of their nation, thereafter will elect chiefs from the founder's family or their lineage, if the heirs meet the original test that reflected the founder's character, whose spirit was supposed to be inherited. Number 14, the trouble of one is the trouble of all. No one may go in want while others have anything to give. This is communalism from my perspective. All are brothers and sisters. Each is his brother or sister's keeper. So again, the trouble of one is the trouble of all. No one may go in want while others have anything to give. Number 15, age grades, sets, and classes are social, economic, political, and military systems for 1, basic and advanced traditional education or formal education. 2, individual and group responsibility roles. 3, police and military training. 4, division of labor. 5, rites of passage and social activities. In chiefless societies, the age grades are the organs of social, economic, and political action. Number 16, bride price or bride wealth is the gift that signifies mutual acceptance on the part of both families and is intended as a family security bond, which may be returned in part if the wife turns out to be worthless or utterly unsatisfactory. Wealth tended to stabilize the institution of marriage. This was not wife buying. Number 17, the community as a whole is conceived of as one party, opposition being conducted by leaders of various factions. Number 1, factions of opposition are usually formed by the different age groups. Number 2, debates may go on indefinitely or until a consensus is reached. Number 3, once a consensus is reached and the community's will determined, all open opposition to the common must cease. To the common will must cease. Number 4, those whose opposition is so serious that they are unwilling to accept the new law may splinter off either individually or in groups under a leader to form a new state or the nucleus for it. Number 17 continued. No, this is number 18. In warfare, the object is not to kill the enemy, but to overcome him with fear, if possible, such as screaming war cries, loud noise, hideous face masks, etc. Where killing is unavoidable, it must be kept at a minimum. In case of defeat, there must be some kind of ruse to enable the enemy to retire in honor. So as you can see, building up through these different traditions, there was no rugged individualism. There was always consideration for others. There was even consideration of your enemies. But those were enemies that looked like you, that were in differing states, that actually responded to loud noises or could be made afraid by a hideous mask. This is not in response to enemies that are true blood-born enemies, because you cannot be afraid to, unfortunately, kill your enemy. Number 19, the African religion, not being a creed or articles of faith, but an actual way of thinking and living, is reflected in all institutions and is therefore the greatest constitutional significance. Politically, the role of the chief as high priest who presents the prayers of the people to his and their ancestors in heaven is the real source of his influence, political or otherwise. Socially, the rites of passage, songs, and the dances to drive away evil, etc., as well as the purification and sacrificial rites for the atonement of sins are important. 20. Some religious and moral law must prevail and the race survive. A man may have more than one wife, for he is forbidden to sleep or cohabit with his wife either during the 9 months of pregnancy or during the suckling period for 1 or 2 years thereafter. 1. The wife may not prepare meals for the husband or family during the menstrual period. 2. The husband is strictly forbidden to have any kind of relationship with one wife during the set period that belongs to another wife. So they even had rules about that considered the wives. 21. The supreme command of the fighting forces is under the council, not the king. If the king becomes the commander-in-chief, it is through election by the council because of his qualification as a general or field commander. This position ends with the war, and the armed forces return to former status under the council, or more directly under the respective paramount chiefs. There were no standing armies, and that is a mistake to not have a standing army. So it's a mistake to have no standing army. You always need a standing army because you always have, and you always have to be training to defend what you own. Because if you have to come together and quickly and hurriedly form a military force to respond to a threat, then your men are not prepared, your women are not prepared. Preparation needs to be a way of life. Okay. The fundamental rights of the African people. The following is a representative number of human rights, also drawn from customary laws or traditional constitutions. Every member of the community had the right to equal protection of the law, the right to a home, the right to land sufficient for earning livelihood for oneself and one's family, the right to aid in times of trouble, the right to petition for redress of grievances, the right to criticize and condemn any acts by the authorities or propose new laws, opposition groups in some areas called the young men were recognized by law, the right to reject the community's final decision on any matter and to withdraw from the community unmolested, the right of rebellion and withdrawal, the right to a fair trial. There must be no punishment greater than the offense or fines beyond the ability to pay. The latter is determined by income and status of the individual and his family. For injuries or loss caused by others. The right to family or community care in cases of sickness or accidents. The right to special aid from the chief in circumstances beyond a family's ability. The right to a general education covering morals and good manners, family rights and responsibilities, kinship groups and social organization, neighborhoods and boundaries, farming and marketing, rapid mental calculation and family, tribal, and state histories. The right to apprentice training for a useful vocation. The right to an inheritance as defined by custom. The right to develop one's ability and exercise any developed skills. The right to protect one's family and kinsmen, even by violent means if such becomes necessary and can be justified. The right to protection of moral law in respect to wife and children, a right which not even the king can violate. And that's important when he says not even the king can violate that right, because in European history, the king had the right to come and screw your wife. The right of a man, even a slave, to rise to occupy the highest positions in the state if he has the requisite ability and character. The right to protection and treatment as a guest in an enemy territory once one is within the gates of the enemy's village, town, or city. The right to an equal share in all benefits from common community undertakings if one has contributed to the fullest extent of his ability, no matter who or how many were able to contribute more. So those were some basic rights that they had in African civilizations. These constitutional principles and practices were held onto and carried by migrating Blacks to every part of the African continent. The fact is, one of the most remarkable parts of the Black man's story, most remarkable because even those societies that sank to barbarism held on to the fundamentals age after age as though they were clutching the last threads of life itself. Even in Egypt, where the Asian and European impact was the greatest, African constitutionalism could not be completely blotted out. So as you can see, there are many vestiges of those ideas that permeate our society today. I call it communalism. And what I call communalism is every man according to his ability is provided for. And he puts in work, but he also reaps the benefit of everyone's work. Because some people simply have the ability to do more and they are rewarded for that, but no one is left totally destitute. I don't think that we I don't think that we consider enough how we're going to take care of those that are the least in our societies. Because if we did consider that, we wouldn't be as rugged and we wouldn't have this rugged individualistic mindset where we think that people are just cogs in a machine, that they're worthless, that if they don't have any value if they're not producing. You must produce, yes, that's a true statement, but you don't have to be on this endless churning where you are taking yourself for granted and you're putting yourself in a position where you're working yourself to death. I don't think that that's an African convention. So, rugged individualism is killing us. That is the end of chapter 6, my friends. We were here for a good time, not a long time. I thank each and every one of you for stopping by. Tomorrow we'll be reading chapter 7, which is the scattering of the people, routes to death and resurrection. Um, we have to talk about gender roles in the society that we're building. We have to talk about age grade and age sets because those things are important. Because if we don't manifest the world that we want, we're going to continue to live in a paradigm that's not the one reflects the world we want to live in. We're going to always live in someone else's paradigm. So I thank each and every one of you for dropping by to listen. I thank each and every one of you for hearing my limited thoughts on the work. Uh, I appreciate you, and I'll see you tomorrow. Peace, fam.